So what's your original training to be a screenwriter? Was it just working with actors, or did you go to school someplace to learn how to?
No, I mean, my school is all theater. When I was in college studying theater, I did take a screenwriting course. That was a lot of fun. And I was even then I remember wrote a play because I was going to be writing plays. I'm in theater now. Yeehaw. And so I wrote a play, and we actually got to perform it. And everyone loved the first half, and the second half, when things got serious and whatnot, and they're like, "Nah, it didn't work so well." I was much more a comic. I've been a comic most of my career in terms of writing, and then for some reason I turned to horror. My mother still has no idea why that happened, but so now I mix both. Now my horror is very funny. At least I try to think so. I like to think so. My middle grade horror can't be over the top horrific because 8 and 9 year olds are reading this, so it has a lot of humor and needs to be infused in it, and that's where it kind of hits my sweet spot of combining the two. As for study, other than that class, no, it's just a lifetime of writing. I've always been a writer, essays or whatever. I was always writing stories, always enjoying writing things. So, and the writing is a muscle. The more you practice it, the better you get. So the fact that I was always writing stuff just makes my writing better and better and better. Just like if you're playing basketball, the more you shoot a free throw, you'll get better at it. You're playing the violin, you'll get better the more you practice. Writing is the same thing. You need to practice.
So you come back to New York and you were writing adult horror for a bit. When do you decide to make that transition to middle grade? What inspires that?
Picture. I so I'm well I so I'm writing adult horror, and then the I start doing the short stories, and they're all adult horror. Most of my short stories are adult horror. But when it came time for a book, I was utterly inspired by a single picture, illustration drawn by the late Trina Shart Hyman, who was a children's illustrator in the 70s and 80s. And she was part of this project where I don't know who asked a whole bunch of illustrators to draw one picture of their favorite fairy tale or fable. It was all for charity. So lots of different people in it. The only one I can ever remember is Chris Alsberg, the guy who did Jumanji. He did one also, but she did one. And while you saw like there was a Little Miss Muffet sat on a tuffet, there was the whoever the one with the Little Miss Muffet, and there was a Peter Pumpkin Eater, and there was a bunch of other stuff. And then Trina Shart Hyman did something called Dr. Fell, and she had this picture of this guy who's this old guy in a top hat. It's black and white. It's all pencil, and he's kind of pointing down at a little girl. He's like, "Hey, come here, little girl," and the girl's looking up at her like, "I don't like you." And on his back, we can see because they're in profile, but the girl can't see. He's got a basket, and out of the baskets are children's body parts. And I just thought that was the coolest thing. So I looked up. So I had to know what is this? What is this? And I asked my mother-in-law, who was a expert in children's literature for 50 years at Boston Public Schools. So if anyone knows anything about fable or fairy tale, it'll be her. So I say, "What is this?" And she says, "I don't know." So we looked it up. We Googled it, and turns out the Dr. Fell was created from a poem in 1680 by a guy named Tom Brown. He wrote a 4-line poem. "I do not like thee, Dr. Fell. The reason why I cannot tell, but this I know, and know it well. I do not like thee, Dr. Fell." That's it. And Trina Shart Hyman took those 4 lines and created this picture. And that picture, it spoke to me. I knew I had a whole story in there. And because it centered on an old man talking to a little girl, I knew the girl was the hero, or in this case, there's 3 kids, 2 of them are girls, where the hero is at this age level. And I started writing with that in mind, that this is for kids, because Dr. Fell is a fable, it's a fairy tale, and it just came out really well. and I mean, it got published, so came out pretty well. But from that one picture, kind of set me on the path, and with that success, and it was so much easier. It was easy for me. Like my adult horror, they're all short stories. I can't extend them. They're just very short little pieces. But this had a whole life in it. I could extend it out. So that's what I ended up doing with the with the books. That's why the books are middle grade and the short stories are adult.
So is it you get inspired, you have this frenzied period of about a month where you write the whole book down and then you send it to an agent and the agent says, yes, let's do this? Or is there a little bit more of a
So took me 4 months to write Dr. Fell. And I was writing other things in between. I used to go and write like one day, write on one project, another project, and just keep going back and forth between 2 or 3 projects until one of them hooked me and I suddenly fell in love. And that was very quickly Dr. Fell. So the others get put aside and I've got to finish this one, go on the path. And so it took me about 4 months to get that done. And I already had an agent at that time because of a book I'd written before then that had gotten his interest but hadn't been sold. And so when I showed him Dr. Fell, he's like, oh, I can sell this. Oh, don't worry. This I can sell. And he was right. Eventually, there were a couple of different companies that wanted it, and they didn't get to have a bidding war because they were with the same parent company. So they just had like a nice conversation. You take it. No, you take it. No, you take it. And then I got my book deal. It was a 2-book deal. So that's the second book, Beyond the Doors, came out of that. But it's not a sequel or anything. It's a completely separate story.
And this is the literary agent Eric, who's thanked in the back of the newest book, or
yep, it's Eric Myers, an excellent agent. Although he does more adult now, he doesn't do as many kids. Was one of his few last kids authors. He had for a long time Chris Grabenstein, and when Chris Grabenstein left, I think that was a lot of his desire to do children's stuff left with that.
Well, that makes sense. But now, does it make sense? I don't know that it does. Sometimes I just say things and I listen to myself. But why
Who knows?
So, okay. So Dr. Fell, that's a pretty easy, relatively easy, considering the other books as far as getting that sold. And then the next book, what's that look like? Between the Doors, is that 4 months of
Beyond the Doors? That took longer. So that was the first time that I'd written something like with a deadline, because they're like, great, it's a 2-book deal. They wanted me to pitch them ideas for a second book, and they specifically said they didn't want a sequel to Dr. Fell. So I had some ideas. I had a couple of different books that I was like that each had written 30, 40 pages, and I summarized those. And then I had an idea for a sequel, so I added it just in case they changed their mind. And then I sent these 4 ideas to my agent to send on, and he came back and said, "No, give me a 5th. 5's a better number than 4." So I didn't have a 5th project, but I had a picture in my mind that I'd played with for years, and so I described this picture, and of course that's the one that they chose. The picture ended up being very much like the cover, although this is much better drawing than mine. Mine would be stick figures, but that's when it came time for the, what do you think the cover should look like? I said, well, the picture that made the whole thing happen. But so when they said they want that book, and here's your deadline, you got to do it by this, and this time, and I had no idea what the story was. I just had a picture. I didn't know what was going on, so I had to do a lot of questioning and figure things out about in trial and error what's going on in this book. Why is it a story? Why is it interesting? So it took 6 months, and I came out with a very, very, very pleased. I think it came out really well. It's very intricate, far more intricate and detailed than Dr. Fell. Dr. Fell, I say, is like a good for like is everyone loves Dr. Fell. And that's when if I'm meeting people in the street and they're asking, or I'm at a fair or a book fair, if their kids are like 8 or 9, I'll push them to Dr. Fell. If they're like 11 and 12, I'll say, you can try Beyond the Doors. It's a little more complicated. You got to follow things a little more. And it's also about 100 pages longer.